The Glass-Steagall Act was one of the most famous acts of Congress in 1933. It did a number of things. Notably, it created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which was the first insurance of commercial bank deposits in the United States. So the idea of an investment bank was really created, of a separate investment bank, was created by Glass-Steagall. So the problem was that people thought that the crash of 1929 had something to do with banks and investment banking and commercial banking being in one operation. And rip-off, there were rip-offs. So if a bank was both an investment bank and also a commercial bank, then the investment bank could use the knowledge from the commercial bank to do insider trading of securities, which somehow was connected back then to the 1929 stock market crash. So the really important thing that's most remembered about the Glass-Steagall Act is it said that you can't be both an investment bank and a commercial bank. So that's why we have Morgan Stanley. Now, it's changed since then, but why is Morgan Stanley separated from J.P. Morgan? Also, why First Boston Corporation separated from the Boston National Bank, I think it was called, in 1934. It was because of the Glass-Steagall Act. But that was repealed. Oh, by the way, other countries didn't do this. So the United States had a complete separation of commercial banking and investment banking. But other countries allowed what we call universal banking throughout this whole period. Over the years, these investment banks and commercial banks complained that they couldn't compete with European, or they're having trouble competing because they couldn't offer all the services that were seamlessly offered by European banks. And so because of lobbying by banks, regulators nibbled away at Glass-Steagall and were beginning to allow commercial banks to get involved in certain investment banking operations. And then the Gramm-Leach Act of 1999, which was signed by President Clinton, finally ended Glass-Steagall. So they can now do both. You can be both a commercial bank and an investment bank. And that led to a wave of mergers of commercial banks and investment banks and insurance companies, which had also been kept separate. So there's some Travelers Group and Citicorp merged. Chase Manhattan Bank acquired J.P. Morgan, so it's now called J.P. Morgan Chase. And UBS Switzerland bought Paine Webber. Credit Suisse bought Donaldson, Lufkin, and Genrep. That's all after. But now there are still people who want Glass-Steagall back. One of them is Paul Volcker, former Fed chairman, who was actually one of the most famous Fed chairman of all because he really whipped inflation. There was out of control inflation. And when he became Fed chairman in 1979, he created a recession, actually a worldwide recession. And he lobbied, among other central bankers, we can't just keep feeding inflation, and it's going to have some cost. So it cost the so-called Great Recession, among the recessions so-called, well, there were two of them, 1980 and 1981-82, which was a severe recession. But he seemed to break rising inflation. So he wanted to put Glass-Steagall back with the Dodd-Frank Act, and he instead managed only to put in something called the Volcker Rule. The Volcker Rule is that commercial banks cannot do proprietary trading. They can do investment banking, but they cannot directly own hedge funds or other risky investments. So commercial banks are allowed to underwrite securities and do the normal activities associated with underwriting of securities, but they can't be just buying for their own account risky assets.